Hey everyone, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a hard look at the inherent vulnerability of the graveyard shift. We're going to explore 4 first-hand accounts drawn straight from night shift workers, where the absolutely mundane turned into just absolute terror. If you've ever worked late or honestly even just been alone in a building after hours, you know exactly what I mean. The atmosphere just completely changes the second the sun goes down, doesn't it? We've gone ahead and structured these accounts into 3 escalating levels of danger.
So, what is the true cost of the graveyard shift? For some people, well, it's just sleep deprivation. But for the individuals in our sources today, the cost was coming face to face with sheer panic. It really makes you question your own safety when literally no one else is around, right? Anyway, let's move right into our first level and see how all this builds.
Level 1. The Uncanny Valley.
Okay, so normally you'd probably expect the biggest challenge of the night shift to be, painfully boring. Stuff like stocking shelves, maybe flipping through a newspaper, just fighting off pure boredom. But the horrifying reality these specific workers actually faced was entirely different. We're talking about being stalked in a bathroom or literally hunted in the dark. I mean, you definitely don't sign up for survival combat when you put on a retail uniform.
It's actually terrifying how quickly a totally normal task can devolve. Our first account comes from a 22-year-old worker who was just trying to stock the cereal aisle at a 24-hour superstore. So there's a loud slide of the front doors, right? And suddenly there's this man standing at the very edge of the aisle with a completely blank stare. His face had these really unusual features. His upper lip protruded oddly, which the worker described as looking almost like a Simpsons character. He asks where the eggs are. Pretty normal. But then he just cuts the worker off right in the middle of the aisle. Out of nowhere, the man starts asking deeply invasive questions. How old are you? Where do you go to school? Do you go to parties? Do you have a boyfriend? And then he crosses that physical boundary. He puts his hand right on the young worker's shoulder. Creepy, right? The worker immediately tries to retreat to the back storage room and eventually ends up waiting by the registers for 20 long minutes, just praying the guy would leave.
Well, thinking the coast was finally clear, the worker jogs over to the employee bathroom. But moments after sitting down, the bathroom door opens. The worker freezes. They literally lift their legs so they aren't visible from under the stall, staring at the floor, not moving a single muscle. And then they look up. The climax of this encounter is just pure nightmare fuel. I could see an eye peering through the crack of the stall door. Absolutely chilling. Trapped in there, the worker realized they only had one shot. They grabbed a box cutter from their pocket, slid the blade right through the crack of the door to force the guy away, slammed the stall open, and sprinted straight out of the store to call the cops. Let's transition over to our next account within the Uncanny Valley, which we're calling the Frozen Phantom. This one takes place at a super isolated country highway gas station, right between midnight and 6 a.m. The worker took this depressing, dead-end shift for one reason: to pay off college loans. And the premium for facing this complete, utter isolation in the dead of a cold December night? Just an extra $5 an hour. Seriously. Now, the pacing of this whole encounter is deeply unnatural. First, a red pickup truck pulls up to the pumps. A 6-foot-tall man steps out and just stands there. The worker looks up and notices the man's head is turned, staring directly into the store. But here's the thing, his face is completely featureless. The worker described it as just pure blackness. Trying to brush it off, the worker looks down, then looks back up, and gasps. The man is suddenly way closer to the glass front door. But he hadn't been walking. He was standing perfectly still in the exact same posture, just magically closer. Absolutely terrified, the worker immediately locks the door, flips the sign to closed, and drops down to hide behind the counter for 5 minutes, desperately texting friends for help. When the worker finally gets the nerve to peek over the counter, the man is right outside the door. And then come the heavy, violent thuds. The thumps of a man actively trying to break down the locked door, before he finally just gives up and drives away into the night. Moving on to Level 2, the invasion of sanctuary. So the timeline of the 7-Eleven stalker really maps out this tightening noose. Check this out. At 10 p.m. on a really quiet rural road, a guy in his mid-20s walks into the store without buying a single thing. He just stands there, staring straight up at the ceiling, making these loud, incredibly weird yelling noises. Initially, the worker actually feels sympathy. They kind of assume the man has a mental disability, so they hand him some chips and gently get him to leave. Fast forward to 11 p.m. though, the store phone rings, and it's the exact same yelling noises on the other end. Okay, so now it's clearly not a misunderstanding, it's a targeted prank.
Then we hit 4 a.m. The worker finally clocks out, goes home, shuts their front door, and their home phone rings within a minute. The worker picks it up and hears that exact same horrifying yelling. Cue the paranoia. The worker spends the entire night hearing strange noises around the house, completely refusing to sleep. But the crucial breaking point actually happens weeks later. The worker finally builds up the courage to go down into their basement. And what do they find? Papers are just scattered everywhere across the floor. Written in Sharpie all over the walls is the number 711 alongside the store's address and, chillingly, the worker's own home address. And honestly, the absolute worst part, a stash of various kitchen knives and a large pocket knife just sitting right there in the closet. So that man making those weird noises hadn't just called the house. He had literally been living in the worker's basement with a stash of weapons. What started as basic human sympathy turned into a very real lethal threat hiding right beneath the floorboards. Just mind-blowing.
All right, let's get into level 3, the ultimate nightmare.
We are setting the scene here with a highly seasoned professional. We're talking about a police officer with 9 years in the K-9 unit, working the graveyard shift with his 2-year-old German Shepherd, Sammy. So they're driving down this remote road completely surrounded by dark crop fields when they spot something super suspicious. An abandoned white van parked deep within the crops with both of its doors left wide open. So the officer and Sammy approach the van to investigate. Almost instantly, Sammy starts going absolutely crazy, pulling on her leash so hard she almost breaks it. The officer steps up, opens the trunk, and is immediately hit by a sickening blast of foul air. I'll just read it exactly as the officer reported it. 7 full body bags, each with a pair of feet sticking out. Talk about a massive, visceral shock. What follows next is just pure, unadulterated chaos. As the officer frantically radios for immediate backup, a twig snaps in the distance. Sammy completely loses it. She breaks her grip on the leash and bolts straight into the dense crops. The officer immediately draws his weapon and runs right in after her, into the blinding dark with these tall crops just whipping him in the face. Suddenly, Sammy's barking stops, but the rustling, it doesn't. The officer starts hearing movement from literally all directions. He's completely surrounded. And then, out of the pitch black, 2 arms wrap violently around the officer's throat. He's being strangled from behind, completely unable to breathe or even fight back. But right at the last second, Sammy barks, and a man screams in agony as the dog bites down hard on the attacker's leg. This gives the officer just enough time to spin around, pull the trigger, and kill the man.
And this brings us to what has to be one of the most agonizing split-second decisions we've covered today. The officer's strict training tells him he needs to hold his ground, wait for that backup to arrive, and secure the crime scene. But he knew for a fact there were more people moving around in those crops. So what's the alternative? Grab the dog and run for your life. Well, he chose to flee. He grabbed Sammy's leash and practically sprinted back to the cruiser, feeling like unseen people were chasing them the entire way. He threw it in drive and sped off without even getting a plate number from the van, fleeing, in his own words, like a coward. When the backup finally arrived at the scene, that white van full of killers was completely gone.
Trusting your survival instincts. Now, that officer obviously felt some pretty deep shame for leaving that scene, feeling like he failed his core duty to protect. But as we've seen across all 4 of these accounts, survival really isn't always pretty. It isn't always about being traditionally brave or following standard protocol to the letter. Whether it's sliding a box cutter under a bathroom stall door, locking a glass door to keep out a literal phantom, or abandoning a crime scene just to avoid being murdered in a dark cornfield, survival is ultimately about listening to your gut when everything goes completely dark. So I want to leave you with this final lingering thought. If you were completely alone at 3 a.m., the only one in the building, the only one on the road, would your instincts save you? You know, it's really easy to judge from the safety of daylight, but the graveyard shift, it plays by an entirely different set of rules. Anyway, thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today. Make sure you keep your eyes open out there, and we will definitely see you next time.